Excellent. Hi, everyone. I'm John Healy. I'm the Vice President at the World Employment Confederation, organization that's focused on ensuring that we have healthy labor markets across the world. And from what I can see in the feed, we've got a lot of people attending today. This is great. I appreciate everyone being here. If you have questions during the course of the session, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A. I'll make sure that we can jump to those, try to bring them into the panelists as we go forward. And we've got 4 great panelists for you today to try and make this a fun conversation. Our topic is pretty straightforward. We've got this on leadership in a remote work world. So we know that things have changed quite a bit. So I'm going to kind of ask our 4 panelists to introduce themselves. And I'm going to ask you each to tell us the number one learning moment you had while working remotely during the pandemic. And no one used the simple, easiest, obvious one, so that my house was not set up for remote work. My kids interrupt me. What was that aha moment that kind of caught you by surprise that maybe you weren't anticipating along the way? So, John, I'll start with you.
Sure. Hi, John. Thanks for having me on the panel. I'm John Beck. I'm the founder and CEO of Ursus. We are a staffing company focused on technology and creative to power digital transformation. We actually have been a remote company for 5 of our 7-year history. So we were doing it before it was cool. And I made the decision, to answer your question about what I learned, I probably learned the lesson 5 years earlier than maybe some, that the opportunity to find talent in other places beyond a 10 or 15 mile radius from an office location was possible and doable with the technology that exists to manage remotely. And that lesson was exacerbated during COVID when there was no choice to go travel and meet people. And half of our company was hired in the last 2 years had never had a chance to meet each other along the way. So that's what we're going to get into in terms of the management responsibility and things that we learned over those 5 years.
Cool. Thanks. Sam?
Thanks, John. Hi, guys. My name is Sam Pesson. I'm one of the co-founders and president of a company called Remote Year. We offer work and travel programs to remote working professionals all over the world, take them to various countries around the world for anywhere between 1 month and 12 months at a time. And most recently, we actually offer retreats, including company retreats, which we can talk about maybe a little bit later. Similar to John, we've been doing remote work since before it was cool. I think it's been 7 years now. And I think the lesson that really sort of came out for me during COVID that I already believed, but really sort of like hit home, was working in my 3rd bedroom is just not good enough every day. I think there's so much more that we need as humans to do our best work and to connect with others. And while I'm a huge believer in remote work, I think it altered the way that I've been thinking about it and also altered the way that we work as a company. I think in-person is really important. I think also even when you are working remotely, having different kinds of surroundings and inspirational places that you can be is just so important when you're working. So that really came out for me when we were all just stuck in our houses.
Cool. Thanks, Sam. And Stephen, you want to give an introduction?
Yeah, thanks, John. So my name's Stephen. I'm the co-founder and CEO of GQR. We're a global search and staffing firm. So we've been in the US for, it'll be a decade this year, and around the world for 12 years. So we're currently in 4 continents, I think about 15 countries at last count. The US is our largest, and in the US we're in 32 of the 50 states. So we're a pretty distributed team, and we have been for a long while. We really accelerated, like everyone else, our remote programs February 2 years ago, and learned a lot of lessons. And I think probably the biggest one is that this is the trend. It's not going anywhere. It's only accelerating. But probably the more important one within that is trust. I think we all value trust in our personal lives, in most of our relationships. In business, probably not as highly as we should have. And it's really important that managers trust their team members, and team members trust their leaders and the organization as a whole. So I think the importance of trust in business and how important that is for every stakeholder, every participant, I think that's the biggest lesson brought home again in the pandemic.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Stephen. And Adam, you want to provide us an introduction from the top?
Hi, John. Hi, everyone on the panel, and hi, the audience. Greetings from London. So for everybody, my name's Adam Hawkins. I work for LinkedIn, and I lead our EMEA and Latin America search and staffing practice. Been with LinkedIn coming up to 3.5 years, and prior to that, worked in the industry for about 20 years internationally. As it relates, John, to your question about learnings during the pandemic, I think there are so many. Probably one that has probably the most prominence is, and probably an obvious one is, there's no one size fits all. I think what we've seen during the pandemic, people tend to talk about leading their team or organizations. The reality in the pandemic showed us that there's just so many subcultures within the teams. Some parts of your organization at times, in probably some of the most troubling moments, some of your team just needed you to tell them what was the one thing they needed to do today. Whereas others, as Stephen talked about, needed full trust and flexibility and empowerment. And I think now that's really transcended into this hybrid working world now where, leaders have to move up and down the scale. They have to sub-segment their organization. We've got new people, we've got tenured people. And I think as long as the business is clear on the productivity and success metrics aligned to the cultural tenets and values of the business, you avoid that sort of disenfranchised type structure, which I think we'll talk a bit about today.
Excellent. Thanks, Adam. So for the 124 people of you in the audience today, I'm going to apologize that we don't have gender diversity in this group, but we do have other forms of diversity. If you think of a couple founders of staffing organizations who have been out here looking at the market in different ways, an organization that focused on building remote from a cultural perspective from the beginning, and LinkedIn, who we all know is an organization that has helped transform the way that we connect with individuals and that individuals connect with opportunities in the marketplace. So I'm hoping that we're going to have a little bit of fun. I've encouraged all the panelists to challenge each other if they see something different, if they have something that they feel is controversial or an alternative position. We want to get that out there. And again, a reminder, ask any questions in the Q&A session. You have your opportunity to kind of upvote on that question so that we make sure that we get additional things out. So John, I'm going to start with a question for you. You wrote a blog on the Great Resignation, and you put a focus on the need to become a better manager. So as I read it, I almost felt like there was a little bit of a rant going on in here, John. There was something personal that came in about the reaction that's come. So tell us a little bit about kind of what you got from, your internal organization, but also from the people who follow you on LinkedIn and who read this and reacted and responded to it.
Yeah, John, if there was a rant response to it, I guess it came from some of the frustration from our clients that are still insistent that employees need to come to the office every single day. And I believe that they're putting themselves at a distinct disadvantage. And when I hear the follow-on reasons for why they think it's important to be there, you hear things like, well, I need to see my employees, they need to be close to me. And I would argue that, whether you're 3 feet or 3,000 feet away from somebody, you have, with the technology that exists today, the opportunity to interact and to have meaningful conversations and to understand who they are and to build trust with them along the way. And some of that, we hear it in the introductions around metrics and things to provide guardrails for your employees. But a lot of it, COVID has really given us the opportunity and the challenging us to become better managers. You have to be more attentive to your employees. Culture, which is an incredibly overused term in the corporate world, has to be promoted. It has to be developed. It has to be defended when things go wrong, because invariably they will go wrong. And, when COVID first hit 2 years ago, that challenged all of us. How are we going to respond to this and keep our teams together? And sometimes that's about telling them what they're going to do in that day. Sometimes it's about giving them a virtual hug and encouragement. And sometimes it's about having harder conversations about how they can work remotely or find alternatives given their unique personal environments. And so I think the challenge for all managers is just to become better with COVID, and an opportunity. There's new ways to interact with our employees that we didn't have before, and fantastic technology and tools, some of them which I cited in the blog post, that give us a chance to really build that culture and build those relationships with our employees.
Cool. Really appreciate that. Anyone feel like they want to jump in on this issue in terms of being a better manager? Has anything kind of stood out, Adam or Sam or Stephen?
I think I agree with John's point. I think there's another thing going on in the wider business world, which is, LinkedIn certainly viewing it as actually the great reshuffle, because we're seeing from a data point of view, there's equally, if not more, people actually moving jobs within organizations. So that's absolutely, going on in the working world right now, which I think managers have to be massively cognizant of. I won't make a provocative statement, but I will talk from experience that, I've been in the industry over 20 years, and I certainly was driven on a culture of presenteeism. And I think, many cultures in the recruitment businesses are often deemed off the back of that. And I think that's to John's, post, which I fully agree, is that, leaders have to mature and evolve their thinking, because culture and good leadership can be achieved, remotely. And I'll talk a bit later about how I think we can do that. But it's just about approaching the situation differently. But we can't drive on presenteeism, because actually candidates will make other choices and they will go elsewhere.
Really good. Really good. I want to maybe pick up on a piece that was referenced in there. You talked about, or John talked a little bit about the tools and the technology. Sam, you started a company that was about learning about remote and experiencing remote long before COVID ever came about, and we'd ever heard of that word along the way. So can you talk to us about some of the tools that have been used to maybe that aren't necessarily just the new hot one that we've heard about, but that have really transformed the way collaboration is taking place? People are able to stay connected with their teams, and how that's worked within the remote year community.
Yeah, definitely. And I think just to start, if anything, I imagine everyone is feeling overtooled, not undertooled. At least that's how we feel. And I think it actually is less about the actual tools that you use and more about the systems that you build within the organization to communicate and use those tools effectively. Like I think about it in sort of three buckets. There's synchronous communications like this, there's asynchronous communications, and then there's what I'll call just personal work time for people to actually not communicate, but rather sort of do their own work. And there's a different tool set for all of those that we can talk a little bit about. But at the end of the day, if you're too far in one bucket and you're just having meetings for everything and every little issue, then your team feels zoomed out and just fatigued from that. At the end of the day, they've had 7-hour-long Zoom meetings in a row, and they're just sort of ready to put their computer down. And similarly, if async is actually too much of the time, then people are just getting 50 Slack messages a minute and they don't know what to do with themselves. And they actually end up spending 2 or 3 or 4 hours of their day just monitoring and responding and reading all the Slack chaos that's going on. So I think it's really about a balance and setting expectations within your organization about when you use this kind of communication, when you use that kind of communication, how you can build time for yourself in the day to actually get done what you need to get done. We use the normal video tools, Zoom or Google Meets that everybody else uses. We've also tried to do a little bit more audio recently. I do think that there is a good use case to use audio for certain meetings and actually get up and maybe walk around. Actually, my co-founder from Remote Year started a company called Spot, which is basically an audio meeting companion for meetings like that, where you can keep meetings that are from your cell phone productive, just like as if you were taking notes at your computer. I think for async, there are some creative ones that people don't think of that often. Voice notes is a really interesting one. In other parts of the world, they're very, very common to replace an email using a voice note on WhatsApp or some other platform. Slack has them now as well. We use those all the time, and I think it's a really interesting and quick format to just get an async message to somebody else. Using platforms like Notion to create sort of an internal company wiki or central point of where you can find things within the company, like where you can find your benefits and where you can find key documents and key reports and stuff like that. Tools like Notion are really effective for that. So that's just some of the stuff we've learned.
Anyone else have have tools that have just really stood out to them, or even thoughts around cadences of what communications work well when, for that daily huddle versus for that quarterly strategy meeting? Anyone found one tool or one sequence of tool use work better than others at this stage?
I would agree with Sam, by the way. We're really mindful of cadence and overwhelming people with Slack and Zoom meetings. I can tell you two, John, that have been really successful for us, and they're asynchronous. One is just a simple widget that sits on Slack, which sets a coffee date for our employees every week on a Monday. And we're a relatively small company of 50 people, but the fact that we're having, two people talk to each other who may not normally do that in their daily work life and miss the opportunity of being in a break room together has proven to be immensely popular. And it's not about, we don't talk about work. We talk about what happened over the weekend, or, the score of a sports game, whatever the case may be. The other one is a tool called Bonusly, which again puts power back in the hands of the employees, where they can acknowledge their fellow colleagues when something they have done they're appreciative of. And it's a point system based, and they can reclaim those points, and it promotes our culture of what we're doing, and it's totally out of the hands of managers. So it's peer-to-peer recognition. Both have been really successful for us.
John, I'd love to sort of pose this back to Sam. It's really interesting, some of the things he shares about, generate engagement through platforms. But what we've seen is, we've gone from everybody remote, we had phases of people going back, and actually, I'll talk firsthand, we're in a blended world right now. But actually it's really interesting to see, how does tech evolve to, where you've got partial groups in the office, but you've also got, people dialing in. And actually, one of the biggest things is that you don't want to make people feel, not engaged like they have before, because when you're talking to everyone on camera, you can build your strategies. But if you're sitting in a boardroom and you've got a camera on the end of the room, it's still quite easy to default back to the way you operate. And I think there's that sort of presenteeism bias that is going to come into the conversation. And I actively think about this now. If I'm in the office and another person's in the office, but I've interviewed someone for a role or for an opportunity, and they've been remote, am I giving them the same experience? I don't know what you think, Sam, but love to think about, is tech thinking about that? Because that is going to be the world that we operate in. And I feel there's some gaps there as well.
Yeah, I think everyone's experienced that, right? Like, been the one person who's dialed in, or potentially been in the room and sort of had a hard time hearing or interacting or engaging with the person who's dialed in, or the people who are dialed in. To be honest, I have not seen that work super well. And so what we've done at Remote Year is we created what we call the all or nothing rule. So it's exactly what you just talked about with your interviews. Either everybody's in person or everybody's digital, and there's nothing in between. Like, we don't do meetings where 5 people are in a room and 3 people are dialed in, because we have found exactly what you said is true, which is it's not equal. You can't contribute the same way, and it ends up creating sort of the wrong perceptions and outcomes. So literally, and even in the early days of Remote Year, we had 5 of us who were, running around trying to run the first program, and a couple who were scouting future locations. And we would just dial them in on WhatsApp. We just give them a call and put them on speakerphone in the middle of the room. And after a few meetings, they said they just literally couldn't engage in any meeting that we were having. And so instead, we all went to separate corners of the same place and just got on our own computers, 1 person per screen. Everybody was equal. And, there's a lot of tech tools that are out, like the Owl, for example, that are trying to fix that problem. I personally haven't seen one that works well enough to actually solve the problem.
Cool. I just threw a poll out. I'm curious of any reaction to the all or nothing. So we'll let the audience try to respond to that. Feel free to drop into the polls, see what's there. We'll pull it up on stage as we go forward. But I think it's fun to give an opportunity to get some feedback from the 144 people who are out there. So I want to move us along a little bit, Stephen, and turn to you. You recently posted something about the benefits of mindfulness. I think it was the 7 benefits. And the article really got me thinking about the impact that mindfulness can have on the employee experience and the base value proposition between employers and the workforce that they engage. And I'm specifically saying employers and the workforce they engage, not necessarily their full-time employees, but maybe the independent contractors that they engage, the gig workers they engage, the full-time employees, kind of everyone. So can you talk a little bit about the value proposition and how it's shifting within your organization and then as well between your organization and your client customers as well in this whole remote working environment?
Yeah, totally. I counted about 16 questions in there, John. I'll chip away. No, I think that's good. On the last one as well, I think technology isn't a substitute for everything, and it's about leveling the playing field when there is technology. So Sam talking about moving to different corners of the same room. It feels counterintuitive, but it's what you've got to do. It's that lack of parity between people that causes a lot of the problem. I've just seen the all or nothing poll pop up as well. I think that's an interesting one. I'm gonna vote. So I think I'll try and break down the first part of the question again about the value proposition of an organization. It has changed drastically. Adam was talking about presenteeism and people being valued based on presence, and I think that's something that's changed massively. Is the superficial measures for people's value and contribution? A lot of those have been eradicated. How early you're in the office, how late you stay. These things are invisible now, or at least should be, and for the most part, so it's changed. So we thought deeply about what an organization should be. Why do we actually exist? What is our value proposition? And we came up with these three things, really broken out into 5. And we use an acronym called PEGOR. So people is the P, and what we think our purpose as an organization is to bring together and surround people with other good people that share similar aspirations and similar ideals and want to achieve different things. There's room for different personalities, different traits, backgrounds. Diversity is a contributor to this, but largely people that enjoy and want to accomplish the same things. The E stands for environment, which used to, physical environment used to play a lot into that, and it doesn't anymore. G stands for growth, O for opportunity, and I for impact. And the first 3 have changed massively during the pandemic. The benefit, the relatedness we get from being surrounded by other good, motivated people is at a disadvantage when we're all in separate physical locations. The environment has changed entirely, and equality is not the same. For the first few months of the pandemic, we had people crouched over coffee tables and sat at their kitchen counters without proper setups. Growth for me is one of the most significant variables that we need to consider. The opportunity for growth and learning. So much happens by osmosis, just by being surrounded people and absorbing what's going on. You think of most of the cultural cues, how to interact with people, candidates, clients, other people in the workplace, how to express empathy and understanding. That's much more difficult, let alone the formalized learning and career development and talent identification that happens in person. So those are the big things that are changing. So what we've had to do is be a lot more conscious and intentional with all of those things. So when it comes to environment, we fund the home setup for people, provide the computers that they want, stand-up tables, big curved screens, all of the equipment so that people have comfortable, sustainable, ergonomic environments. The people element, we had a jet set program. We've had lots of offices around the world. Traveling and experiencing the world in different cultures was always a big thing for us. So we had a jet set program every quarter. At the top value adds in a team would be awarded a jet set and go to travel to a different office. So we now have that universally for the entire organization. So 4 times a year, all of our people will come to one of our hub offices. And that's a budget from $10,000 up to $40,000 for each of our people to travel. There is massive cultural loss if you can't transmit and transfer those ideals that don't occur when we're all sat at home. And then the other thing is learning programs. So instituting learning programs so that people can continue to develop, go and gain knowledge outside of the organization and bring that back in. That's been the big focus for us. So doubling down on our value propositions to provide a good environment, still be surrounded by good people, in person and remotely, and then opportunities for growth.
Cool. Intrigued with the learning aspect of it, in that one of the big knocks on Uber, that they missed the opportunity where they had so many drivers sitting waiting to pick up their next ride, and never used as an opportunity to promote upskilling and development of the workforce. And I feel like in many cases in the staffing industry, we have a similar situation. We have people who are, maybe they've been looking for work for a while, or they're just not happy with the types of opportunities that are being presented in front of them. And that opportunity for upskill and learning to kind of elevate their position certainly represents an opportunity in the marketplace for everyone to think about. Adam, I want to come over to you and talk. You talked about culture and subcultures early on in the introduction. So you wrote it was the reinvention of company culture. And can you maybe take us through what you've had to do to develop the culture at your organization in this remote world? How has that been? Clearly had to be personalized in many ways, but what's been unique for you as you think about company culture inside LinkedIn, such a large global organization, but also very local teams?
Yeah, I think, John, I can share some of that, but I also share some of the observations that we're seeing, with a large amount of people on the platform. It's really interesting to see some of the trends as well. I think when we talk about reinvention of company culture to remote work, I think the first thing to call out is we all gravitate to the pandemic, but the reality is that it's not just the pandemic that's driving this. We've seen a material shift, and there's a rise of millennials and Gen Z or Gen Z entering and reshaping the workforce that we have today. So that is going on as well. And there's, I think, as John said, we've got record numbers of people leaving their jobs internally or externally, finding new employees. And I think it's businesses really need to align their culture now to what employees want, because ultimately the power is with the employee or the candidate. And people that don't figure that out will not secure the best talent. I think there's 4 areas that I think are really important to think about, and we certainly see, and something I've certainly felt. If I start with the first one, and agree with Stephen on this, the 9 to 5 does not exist anymore. The conventional structures of employment do not work. So after 2 years of remote, nobody wants to work 9 to 5. Ultimately, and the headline is, employees want freedom and flexibility. And we've really moved from a material shift where working remotely with flexibility was like a deemed benefit. We've quickly adjusted workforce, policies, but ultimately, and again, Stephen mentioned this, we're operating now with freedom, but ultimately what I determine is the trust contract, empowering people to decide where they do their best work and how they do it. So that freedom is essential. The second point, and it talks a bit to mindfulness that Stephen mentioned, is that good work-life balance is absolutely the highest priority for employees and job hunters. Our data will absolutely tell you that, demonstrating your culture and your go-to-market proposition that includes work-life balance is a much higher priority in many cases to excellent compensation, and that's from a 2021 survey that we did. So when I look at things like flexibility and work-life balance, that if we don't offer that, people will walk away because they've got ultimate choices now. I think where we were probably 6 months ago is there was still the fear of, last in, first out. I think, the great reshuffle has really resonated, and people are not afraid to walk out if they don't get the work-life balance they want. I think, being a little bit flippant, but people expect a lot more than yoga and health insurance now. Mental health is massively important, and people need to have a clear support structure and mechanism around that. And I think what we're talking about today, John, in terms of leadership, is that very simply, workers want to feel like the people they work for, their bosses, care about them and are taking time and attention to do that, which I think is, one of the benefits from, the pandemic and working digitally is that people are asking, how are you, a lot more. And I think people are a bit more cognizant that people are walking in and out of calls, and then they go into their life, and their life is intertwining as well. So I think that will remain and is very important. The third area is about working culture has evolved. And I think one of the panelists mentioned this is When we've been built maybe on a culture of presenteeism, we've also had a bit of a culture of like the 1 a.m. hero. It's no more. It's very much, you got to make room for work-life balance. Employees are reevaluating where, when, how they do their best work. Companies that offer that flexibility are getting ahead. So if I think about positioning out to market and winning the war on talent, companies really need to refine their employee branding, and they need to evidence that this is living in their business as well. The final thing, which I think is a real positive out of the pandemic, but also I think this is definitely something being driven by the millennials and Gen Z, is that one thing that's happened during working from home is that many of us have reduced their commuter time. We've suddenly had 2 hours. I travel on the tube every day to London, or I'm on a plane. I've got effectively 2 hours back. If I'm smart around that and I don't jam it with more meetings, what do I do with that time? So actually what people have actually done is invested in what's important to them from a personal purpose. Now, let's be very clear. Gen Z do not need a company anymore to help them define their purpose, but they are looking for businesses that have a complementary purpose agenda to them. And actually what we're seeing now is candidates, employees looking for companies that support what is defined as the side hustle. Can I pursue my personal project, whether it's non-for-profit or revenue generating, but will you allow me to develop my interests, which I've had time to do during a remote work? Now, companies also need to be very clear on what they're asking, but that trade-off in trust, again, between allowing me to develop what's personally important to me and complementary to the business are things that are very important. And I think you'll see a lot more, John, on the working agenda around like dual roles, flexibility, condensed weeks to allow people to pursue that. And I think companies that are comfortable with that sort of coexistence of personal projects and side hustles, again, are the people that are going to understand that the employees need flexibility and balance.
Thanks, Adam. So you're hitting on some real points of personalization in leadership that I need to know the individual workers. I can't just kind of typecast them or you're in bucket A, bucket B, bucket C, but that the relationship has become highly individual along the way. So I want to maybe shift it back to each of you. You've all been in leadership roles in your organization for a while. Again, we've got 3 founders on the line who have built something. I think that speaks to an element just within the industry in and of itself. But what are you personally doing to prepare yourself to lead differently as a result of this? Is there any particular learning or education process that you're going through, different process that you've set up for yourself that maybe has proven to be effective or ineffective for you along the way to maybe help the other leaders on the line out there? I'll leave that for any of you to chime in on.
John, can I go? I'll start because I don't want to miss responding to one of Adam's points about promoting and accepting the side hustle and the different environment that we live in today. I'm in total agreement with Adam. Our politicians and legal system, at least here in the States, is not necessarily following suit. And so as a business owner, there are third rails surrounding us everywhere. And it's even worse here in California, where we have to be really mindful of how we're paying our people, how we're all the things that a staffing company wrestles with and has potential exposure, let's be honest with, is really, really challenging. I think the way to respond to it while the political and legal system catches up is to be, as a leader, more accepting and creating an identity for the business, which is in line with what our employees are asking for and giving them a voice, whether that's social responsibility causes or diversity and inclusion initiatives, all the things that this generation, thankfully, is more mindful and wanting. We want to give them an opportunity to use the business as a way to carry that message forward. That's a first step. All the other tactical things behind it to support the side hustle and worker classification, whatnot, we have to play within the legal bounds and do what we can to support, along the way without hitting that third rail. So it's challenging. And that's one of the things that I look at is how can we promote this as part of our culture and the way that we do things while we stay within the lines.
Cool. Just as we go on, and I'll let others respond, but I just threw another poll out, just asking, does your organization encourage your workforce to have side hustles? And by that, I'm specifically saying promote it, like that it's a good thing versus they have to hide it. So for the audience, go ahead and respond out there. But in the meantime, anyone else want to focus on kind of what they're doing to kind of develop their own leadership style in dealing with more remote workers?
Yeah, so I think a practical thing that we did. So we've been in hypergrowth for a decade. So every 18 to 21 months we double in size. So we reorg continuously, and then during the pandemic, right at the beginning of the pandemic, coincided with our organizational planning sessions, and we realized there's so much legacy infrastructure that is geographically tethered. Most reporting lines were geographic, regionally focused, and that's just irrelevant now for most organizations. We're 90% fully remote, 4% partially, and 6% on site. And those are people that choose to. Generally, everyone can be fully remote. But the mechanisms of leadership and accountability are mostly based on geographic systems, and without dismantling those and rebuilding those, you don't realize all of the gaps. And particularly for people at the bottom and joining the organization, they don't know who to go to, where to go to get answers, accountability, and all those sorts of things. So redesigning an organization, totally ignoring geographic location, is a big thing that we've done and continuously done, and we're still 2 years later finding things that are actually based on geography, which is no longer relevant. So that's important. Making sure that those are then visible digitally. When you're in a physical space, the hierarchy is visual, is visible. You can see it about the space, and that doesn't exist anymore. So we've, particularly our management teams, we've reorganized around where are all of the organic interactions happening. Your managers and mentors should be the people that you are interacting with consistently because you're working on similar projects, initiatives, similar clients. So we're trying to reinforce that opportunity for osmosis that has evaporated in the last couple of years. So that's something very practical. And then from an education standpoint, learning how to lead, and particularly generational gaps, understanding people's motivations, what they're really here for, has been a big focus for us. I'm sure we'll get onto the culture and motivation stuff later as well.
Cool.
Yeah, my 2 cents on this one is, as a leader, I just try to focus on 3 things, which is connecting everyone to the mission or the company, connecting them to each other, and then connecting them to me and the rest of the leadership team. And I think something Stephen said earlier in one of his points was around how much you invest in in-person meetups and in-person time. And for me, that's the easiest number one way to do it. I think remote only works if you have some cadence of meeting up in person at a regular, 3 months, 6 months, or potentially 12-month increment. I think if you do that, everything about remote becomes so much better. You use that in-person time for personal bonding and connectivity, as well as strategic planning and goal setting, and you're already miles and miles ahead, I think, of how most companies operate in a remote environment. So that's one big one. I think the other one for us is around goal setting, and how important that becomes in a remote environment. I think teams can really get motivated by seeing clear goals, having direction of how they connect to those goals. Like, what is my part in these 5 organizational priorities for the year? And then on a monthly basis, looking back and saying, hey, we did these 3, we nailed it, and these other 2 didn't quite get there, and let's talk about why and how we're going to fix it. I think that whole goal system and performance review needs to be so tight in a remote environment and so well thought out. And like the amount that we prep for those types of meetings with our team is so much greater than other roles I've had in the past, where you just all get in a room and sort of talk about it. So I think you just need to be really intentional with how that works, and it has the ability to really connect everyone to the organization and to each other. So those are probably the two most important things: in-person time, and then when you are remote, having those systems built for sort of operationalizing that plan that you came up with and you built together in person at an offsite.
Cool. Adam?
Yeah, just a few, and I'll try and keep it quite practical and simple. I think if I think about personal ownership, it's, everything I said is like walking the talk. So, you know, not sending that email at 9 o'clock at night because it fits me, actually just delaying the timer of sending that out. I think as a business, we've committed to, a cadence of no internal meeting Fridays, for example, just to give employees to breathe. Obviously, does everybody is everybody able to conform to that? Not always, but actually, if the best outcome is that people get some breathing space on a Friday afternoon or Friday morning to do some stuff, that's been working really well and really well received. Obviously, client meetings sort of are very important. I think investing in well-being, again, walking the talk around that, giving people the space to talk, communicate. I think from a practical point of view, and I mentioned it in my opening, John, around sort of, one size doesn't fit all. We've had to think very cleverly around, what do people need? So, especially when, and it was quite an interesting epiphany when I spoke to somebody that had joined the organization and they'd never been in the office. And I was like, how's your onboarding? And they were like, there's a lot to go through. And actually the hardest bit is that it's taken me 45 days to have 30 coffees, online, which I could probably have done in 1 week in the office. So it's about, segmenting your business and thinking that actually, some of our people that were maybe living in a flat, 1-bedroom flat in Canary Wharf, are really struggling and they need to be in the office and they are missing opportunities to learn by osmosis, all the stuff that can't go in an onboarding manual or an instructor-led, session through Zoom. But actually there are many people that have gardens and actually are embracing the remote environment where they do have the freedom because they've got knowledge of the business. They're already attached to the culture. So we've really thought about, trying that. And ultimately, I think, what it sort of relates to is that, what does the office become as well? I've had a sort of material mind shift is that I don't come to the office to work. I come to the office to connect and collaborate. So our spaces need to be different. We need to think about that. And it's okay to say I'm going in just to meet people, because I think Sam mentioned it is like, people value that. And if you can come with this sort of, again, you can't run a team of developers in San Fran the way you could run a sales team in Germany. So what leaders have to do is build in the right cultural tenets, things like team norms. So like what works for us as a team, does it work to come in every third Tuesday? Can everybody get in? And is that a good time for us to connect? And actually appreciate that we're not all going to come in and just work to a laptop. We're actually going to speak to each other. We're going to learn, we're going to share. And I think that's the way, it's trial and error, working, getting feedback and talking to the teams and going back to the point of like listening as a boss to what's important to people.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that, each of you. And I added one more poll in on how many no meeting days per week does your organization have? I saw a recent study on it that showed that the optimal impact in terms of worker engagement was at 3 for organizations. So look it up in LinkedIn. I'll see if I can find the post. Ping me afterwards. I'm sure I can track it down for people, but I'm curious about where organizations are there. And then I'll go back to the previous poll, which was about whether or not organizations promote the side hustle. 60% no, 30 or 40% yes inside an organization. So we're still in that mixed side of things right now. So I want to kind of come back to that aspect of a side hustle. We've all seen the rise of the gig workforce, the emergence of this open talent marketplace where, well, we want to call it the passion economy or the creator economy that's out there. We're still seeing about 60% of people that are operating in that marketplace are doing it on a part-time basis versus a full-time basis, but they're clearly indicating, I want to do more of it along the way. So as I guess for anyone who wants to respond, having your employee population working remotely, has to have changed the perceptions of how you engage your external workforce. Do we still give out different color badges for internal workers versus external workers? Do we say people aren't allowed to come to a meeting because they're not on our salaried payroll? Some of those barriers have shifted and changed along the way. So I'm just curious, particularly if I look, for Stephen and John as leading companies that are assigning your workforce out to other customers, are you seeing how they engage your workers as part of their teams changing in a material way? Or is that co-employment paranoia that has been out there for so long, is that still a cornerstone of how your workers are being treated?
Go on, John, if you want to go. I mean,
no, go ahead, Stephen. Go ahead. I wish there was one definitive answer.
Exactly. And I wish they were mostly good answers. It's interesting. So we co-developed a motivational profiling framework with a group of behavioral scientists a few years ago. And we focus on being a high performance organization. We wanted to see what environmental and personal factors went into that. We also allow most of our clients to use it, and sometimes complete full campaigns to assess the motivational state for workforces. It's based on something called self-determination theory, which maybe I'll save that for another time. But frankly, no, for the most part, there is still a line. That line's permeable and changing. Depends on the type of the organization. We do a lot of business in health and with hospital systems. And for example, in nursing, there's been a significant trend towards travel nursing and away from permanent nursing, particularly during the pandemic. Nurses have been incredible. They've been moving across the country, across the world, to go to these areas of acute demand. And there is the same lessons that staffing organizations are learning, and all organizations are learning about themselves. These big hospital systems that have done things the same way for decades and decades are now being forced to reckon with the way that they treat their staff and the differences between permanent and contract staff. And what they're finding is that there are a lot of benefits now that the staffing and contract providers have that they don't provide internally. So I think we're helping each other, providing that internal competition to raise the game, and particularly in supply constrained talent areas, to make sure that we're providing fulfilling careers. I think my general answer is not yet. There's still a distinction, but it's heading in the right direction. And because of goodwill, good intentions, but market forces are helping as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. From what we're seeing, I think a lot of it depends on the job function too. If you're a graphic designer, you're probably less of a threat to have access or steal intellectual property versus a software developer. That being said, we're seeing a lot of our contractors come forward with their own incorporation and paperwork, frankly, to come back to us and to the clients that we represent and say, I do work on multiple projects. I do have the proper insurance to account for it. And I'm going to operate under the assumption that you have the right guardrails in place to ensure that I'm not having access to information I shouldn't see. So I think the workers are driving a lot of that behavior as well, which we encourage. We think that's a good thing. There's not enough people on the planet to do the work that's required right now. And if people want to work 18-hour days and split that up into 6-hour shifts, then more power to them.
Just from the inside, on my side, I mean, I would say 1,000% to your question, John. Like, if you were in a meeting with 5 of our full-time employees and 3 independent contractors who we work with on, SEO and design and maybe one other function, you'd have no idea who was who. I think it's the same concept as what I was referring to earlier with the all or nothing rule. Everybody's sort of an equal in those meetings, right? And of course, there's different comp and benefits and everything behind that for different types of staff. But at the end of the day, I think one of the benefits of remote work is that it, at least for us, has normalized that sort of gig economy work staff that helps us with a bunch of different projects all the time.
Cool. I appreciate everyone chiming in there. I think as we see the size and the level of engagement of open talent coming into more and more organizations, this idea of having walls between the types of workforce based on the employment contract that they're under is going to be more and more difficult for organizations to try to impose. And coming up with a way to deal with that is something to look at. I encourage and apologize for the quick rant to a sidebar, but it's where we all have a responsibility to stand up and advocate for what is right, to make a workforce operate effectively for our clients and for our own organizations. Don't be silent on this. Speak up, talk about what's right, talk about what's important, and leverage the power of your relationship with your workers who are telling us the answers to what works best there and what causes them to be part of the Great Resignation when it's simply not working. Interesting in the poll. I'm just going to pop this up on the screen of the how many no meeting days per week that we have. And we're in 75%, 76.92% that are in the 0 to 1. I'm guessing a lot of those are probably more on the 0 side than the 1. And I'm going to just go ahead in the chat, post an article that I referenced. It's from MIT Sloan that did some work on this to really look at and explore the implications. And if you're not having meeting-free days, particularly if you're operating in a remote environment, I would encourage kind of taking a look at it, maybe sharing this article with some people inside your organization, maybe just think a little bit differently of what's there and where productivity comes into play. We're at about 10 minutes left for us. If you've got a specific question that you want our panelists to answer, please add it into the Q&A. I'm going to kind of hit on one additional topic that has really come up a lot in the early part of the conversation. I think every one of you as panelists, as you either provided your introduction or as you talked about where learning was or some of the implications of what was going on, used the word trust. And as we were preparing for this session, I had put a question out and to people who followed me, asking them questions that they wanted asked. And one of the questions was, talk a little bit about the impact on trust, both horizontally and vertically. So horizontally amongst your peers that are operating in a remote environment that maybe you hadn't operated with remotely in the past, but then vertically up and down inside your organization on the implications of trust and why it matters most. So not asking you to repeat what you've already covered, but if you've got another element that just really speaks to the importance of trust and maybe some of the techniques to develop that trust that have been important to you and your organizations.
I'm happy to kick off, John. I think trust and compassionate leadership is one of the most important things today and going forward. I think Sam referenced it around, productivity and performance measures as well. I think, having a sort of a basis or a viewpoint of, I'm going to lead with trust. I'm going to, empower my organization to decide where they work, how they work. But they've also got to be very clear on what works for the organization as well, because I think the fear from some leaders is like, do we just then generate and degrade in somewhat the culture because we're allowing people to do what? So I think there's 2 points to that. Is on the basis of leading with trust, you've got to be clear on what performance and productivity looks like and what success is in the business to hold people accountable. And the great thing is, and Sam would know this better than I, you've got technology to drive accountability. And I think the fear pre-pandemic was, can we do that? The reality is absolutely we can. I think then it's about what is the fabric and culture and the DNA of a business, and what are those cultural values and tenets that hold us together as a combined organization. And I think that's the clever bit and the hard bit to get right, because I think there's going to be a trade-off, here of what a business wants to stand by and what it wants to be known for and what its purpose is. And, some businesses may gravitate to being more present. They might have more flexibility around things like no meeting days. But I think the company also has to take some level of stance, and you as a leader, of what you think is going to deem acceptable, having listened and cared and learned from your organization. And I think, I call that, when I've been speaking about it is about establishing this trust contract, and if people are then not conforming and they're not delivering, then you've at least got that contract that's been formed on the basis. And I think that's what businesses are working out, but they're also working that out per team and per sub organization. And I think getting that right is where the conversation is right now, John.
Yeah, Adam, I love the term, the trust contract as well. I think it takes time to develop that contract. I think to Sam's point, and Sam, we also spend a lot of time preparing for how we're going to communicate our corporate goals and deliver those to the individual and what it means to them and how they're contributing to those. And along the way, you may get there different ways by employee, by teams and departments, because not one size doesn't fit all. You're seeing the same thing happen in coaching of athletes. More coaches are now understanding that different personalities are going to respond to different types of coaching. And it's absolutely true with employees as well, too. Some people you want to leave alone so they can have the space to do their things. Other people need a lot of guidance, in particular in a remote world. And that takes effort and time. And back to, the original comment around becoming a better manager, people are not reshuffling and taking on new jobs necessarily because of money, although that's some of it. But it's really about, am I in an environment where I feel like I am valued, where I feel like I have an opportunity for growth, and that people understand how I am going to get to where I want to go. And that's not entitlement necessarily. That's investing in your employees.
Sorry, Sam. What are you going to get? Sam, you go.
Thanks. I'll keep it quick, but I think the unique thing about a remote environment is that you really need to lean on work to build trust more so than typical personal relationship building that you can do more easily when you're in person or in an office environment. And I think we try to, especially in the early days of somebody starting, which is really when you're in the trust building phase, to just going back to the goals and goal setting, goal cascading that John and I have talked a lot about. I think to give people really clear-cut priorities and really clear-cut accountabilities early on that they can then deliver on is an incredible trust-building exercise, right? Like that first time that somebody new starts on the team and you say, hey, I need this report by Wednesday that has XYZ, and they deliver the report, on Tuesday night and has everything you were looking for. That's trust, right? That builds so much trust when you're working on something together and you can deliver results together in a remote environment. And so I think the question is, how do you create moments like that, and how do you create culture and communications that enable that to happen between many people on the team, and also, of course, between you and your leadership team and everybody else at the company.
Yeah, I think so well said. Trust and transparency go hand in hand. So with goal setting, OKR frameworks, those sorts of things are very good. And then I think the foundation is an abundance mindset. It sets off a positive loop where everyone's appreciative and grateful for each other. They can trust each other and give each other the freedoms to behave autonomously and work well.
All right. So as we get ready to close up, I want to ask one final question for everyone to answer, and we'll reverse order. So Stephen, you're going to go first, and then we'll get Sam and John, and then we'll get Adam to finish us off. Is this remote work and work from anywhere phenomenon that we are all living with today, is it here to stay, or is it a fad? Stephen?
It is here. It's done. It's not going anywhere.
Sam?
Agreed. Not going anywhere.
John?
100%. Yes.
Adam?
Yeah, definitely new normal. And as I said, it's not just because of the pandemic, it's because of the integration of millennials and Gen Z into the workforce. It's absolutely here to stay.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank the audience, the 121 of you who are still here with us, who have participated all the way through, for the conversation and dialogue that's been going on in the chat, for the questions that were submitted ahead of time, to Jan and the team at Candidly who put together this event. Let's just look at this simple aspect of, we talk about leadership and we talk about a change. This is an event that we used to all have to get on a plane to go to. Only a select few were able to be there. And instead today, we're seeing, I think the last number I heard was 9,300 people registered for the event over the course of the week to kind of tap into the sessions that are really meaningful to them. So congrats to Jan and his team for pulling this together for another year. Stephen, Adam, John, Sam, thank you for joining us today. Appreciate it. And thanks to everyone on the line.